We usually see history as a collection of borders and wars, but what if the blueprint for our entire world was written long before the first empire even rose? In an ancient text, there is a sequence of names often dismissed as a mere genealogy. But look closer. These aren't just labels. They are the source code of civilization, a naming protocol that didn't just record the past, it programmed our future. To understand why we are who we are, we need to stop looking for a map and start decoding the invisible architecture of our own identity. We often view the history of our origins through the lens of a family tragedy, a narrative of brothers drifting apart and languages becoming muddled. But if we analyze the early movements of humanity through the cold logic of social physics, a different reality emerges. The cradle of civilization was not just a home, it was a pressure cooker. Remaining in one central location after the Great Flood was not a blessing, but a death sentence for a growing population. History tells us that a single family gathered at the foot of Mount Ararat, yet the laws of thermodynamics dictate that such high concentration leads to systemic exhaustion. Resources deplete, power stagnates, and the risk of total collapse increases. To survive, the system required a release, a centrifugal force of power. This was not a random dispersal, but a strategic reboot of human society. Each lineage acted as a specific protocol designed to test the limits of our species in diverse environments. We first observed this force pushing toward the north and the west. Japheth, a name that signifies expansion, was the primary carrier of this outward protocol. His descendants were not merely wandering, they were programmed to seek the horizon, to thin the density of the center by claiming the distant coastlands and islands. Through his 7 sons, the foundation of the Eurasian expanse was laid. From Gumamer, we trace the Ashkenaz, the legendary horse masters of the steppes who redefined nomadic warfare. From Magog came the fierce warriors of the vast Eurasian plains, while Madai's lineage settled the highlands, establishing the Medes and setting the geopolitical groundwork for the future Persian Empire. But the most vital release for the Western world came through Javan. His descendants became the Ionian Greeks. They mastered the Mediterranean not just as traders, but as carriers of a new Hellenic influence that would eventually wrap around the entire coastline. By pushing into the cold and the salt air, Japheth's line functioned as a safety valve, ensuring that if the center failed, the fringes of the world would thrive. Now we turn our gaze toward the south. Ham, whose name denotes heat or burning, carried a destiny of empire building. While Japheth sought the open spaces, Ham's descendants focused on the concentration of power and material transformation. They moved toward Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, where the environment demanded rigid organization and massive infrastructure. Cush, his firstborn, established a lineage of wealth and commerce across Arabia. From this line emerged Nimrod, the world's first heroic warrior and the founder of the Mesopotamian giants, Babylon and Nineveh. In the Nile Valley, the descendants of Mizraim, the biblical name for Egypt, constructed a civilization of stone and mathematics that would endure for millennia. Further west, the lineage of Put secured North Africa and the Sahara. Finally, Canaan, his youngest, settled the vital land bridge that would later become the Promised Land of Israel. These were not just settlers, they were the city founders of the ancient world. Their expansion southward was a necessary decompression, turning the harsh, burned lands into the engines of ancient industry. While the north and south were being claimed, the heart of the world remained with Shem. His name, meaning reputation or name itself, reflects a lineage destined to hold the crossroads. His descendants settled the Fertile Crescent, the land where history and language converged. Through Ashur, the ferocious Assyrian Empire arose, a force that would eventually dominate the Near East through sheer military discipline. Through Lud, we find the wealthy Lydian kingdom, which gifted the world its first coined money. And through Aram, the Aramean tribes spread a language that would serve as the lingua franca for regional commerce for centuries. But the most meticulous detail is reserved for the line of Arphaxad, specifically through Eber, from whom the name Hebrews is derived. This lineage provides the meticulous record that bridges the ancient world to the rise of Abraham. By dispersing in all directions, humanity was not falling apart. It was diversifying its portfolio of survival. This vattering of civilization allowed humanity to experiment with different social models in isolation, away from the stagnation of the core. The diversity we see on the map today is the result of that original, brilliant strategy of separation, a force that pushed us into the unknown to ensure we would never truly disappear. As the map of humanity expanded across the physical world, a secondary map was being written within the very marrow of our bones. We often view the distinct appearances of the world's nations as a mystery of deep time, but in reality, we are looking at a masterpiece of rapid biological adaptation. To understand how one family could diverge into every human phenotype we see today, we must look past the names and into the underlying code of life. This phenomenon is known in modern science as the founder effect. When small, isolated groups break away from a parent population, they create a genetic bottleneck. In these tiny pockets of humanity, specific traits are amplified while others are silenced. As the descendants of Noah moved into extreme, unforgiving climates, their DNA effectively began to reprogram itself. They weren't just moving to new lands, they were evolving the biological armor necessary to survive them. We begin with the lineage of Japheth, pushing into the north and the west. As these families settled the coastlands of Europe and the vast Eurasian steppes, they encountered an environment where the sun was no longer a constant companion. In these regions of low ultraviolet radiation, the dark protective pigmentation of the cradle became a liability. The body faced a crisis. A lack of sunlight meant a failure to produce vitamin D, a nutrient essential for life itself. To prevent the collapse of the lineage, a biological upgrade was triggered. Over generations, the skin began to shed its melanin, becoming lighter and more transparent. This was not a change of essence, but a calculated survival mechanism. The pale skin of the northern nations functioned as a specialized solar panel, engineered to absorb every stray ray of light to keep the bones strong and the spirit alive in a world of shadow. Now we move toward the south following the sons of Ham. Here the environmental pressure was the exact opposite. In the intense, unforgiving heat of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, the sun was not a rare resource, but a lethal threat. Under the relentless UV radiation of the equator, unprotected DNA would be scorched, and the health of the community would wither. The response was a surge in melanin, a biological shield that darkened the skin to absorb and neutralize the sun's energy. This dense pigmentation became the sun armor of the southern empires, protecting the reproductive future of the lineage. Whether in the high deserts of Kush or the lush valleys of the Nile, this dark exterior was the only reason a single family could thrive under a sun that would have destroyed their northern cousins. Their skin was a record of their triumph over the heat. While the north and south adapted to the extremes, the lineage of Shem remained in the temperate heart of the ancient world. Settling the Fertile Crescent, they maintained a biological middle ground, a baseline from which the other branches had diverged. Their physical traits remained a testament to the original environment of the cradle, while their brothers became the living evidence of humanity's incredible plasticity. What we today call race is, in truth, nothing more than a series of these biological upgrades. These differences are not signs of a fundamental division, but proof of how high the stakes of survival truly were. When we look at the diverse faces of the world, we aren't seeing different kinds of people. We are seeing the same family wearing different suits of armor, fashioned by the latitudes where they chose to stop. This internal transformation ensured that no matter how far the descendants of Noah traveled, the flame of life would not be extinguished. We are a single species that learned to wear the climate of the earth upon our skin. As the biological map stabilized, the stage was set for the next great chapter of our story, the expansion into the unknown horizons that lay far beyond the reach of the ancient world. While the records of the ancient world focus heavily on the regions surrounding the Mediterranean and the Near East, it is a critical mistake to assume that the human story ended where the parchment ran dry. To understand the full scale of our origins, we must change our perspective. We should view the Near East not as the total boundary of humanity, but as the epicenter of a global seismic event. From this single point of impact at the foot of Ararat, ripples of migration were sent outward, moving with a velocity that carried our ancestors far beyond the vision of the earliest chroniclers. The silence of the Far East and the Americas in these ancient genealogies is not an absence of life, but a testament to the incredible speed of the expansion. As the descendants of Japheth claimed the northern coastlands, the momentum of their movement did not stop at the Caspian Sea or the Altai Mountains. Archaeological data and genetic markers tell a story of a relentless eastward push. These groups followed the great river systems and the mountain corridors, eventually reaching the fertile plains of the Yellow River and the dense forests of the East Asian coastline. Though the names of these pioneers were not recorded in the West, their biological signature remained identical to their brothers in the Fertile Crescent. These were the invisible pieces of the map, civilizations that were already taking root while the empires of the West were still in their infancy. Now we must cast our gaze even further, beyond the reach of the known world, to a journey that remains one of the greatest feats in human history. While the southern empires of Ham were dominating the Nile and the Luang Ha, other branches of the family were moving toward the edge of the Siberian expanse. Here they encountered the Bering Land Bridge, a temporary corridor of earth that connected the old world to the new. In a silent, epic migration, these families crossed into the Americas, carrying the same source code of civilization that had begun at the epicenter. From the frozen tundras of the north to the tropical jungles of the south, the foundations of the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca were laid by the same ancestors who had once stood at the foot of Ararat. The geographical isolation of the Americas created a mask of difference, but beneath the surface the connection remained unbroken. Moving beyond the visible horizon, we find yet another ripple that crossed the greatest obstacle of all, the open ocean. These were the nameless explorers of the Pacific. While history often focuses on the traders of the Mediterranean, these seafarers mastered the vastness of the Oceania and reached the shores of Australia and the distant islands of the Pacific. Using only the stars and the currents, they extended the human map to its absolute limit. Their arrival in the Pacific Islands was the final echo of the original expansion, a movement so vast that it eventually wrapped around the entire globe, turning the epicenter into a memory. The map provided by ancient texts like Genesis 10 is not a complete atlas, and it was never intended to be. It is a snapshot of the starting point. The missing regions, the Far East, the Americas, and Oceania, are not voids on the map. They are the finished edges of the ripples. When we align the ancient records with modern archaeological footprints, we see that the human family was never a fragmented collection of unrelated groups. Instead, we see a unified, explosive expansion that sought every corner of the earth. The silence of the Far East in the ancient record is actually an invitation. It tells us that our story is much larger than the lands we can see. The ancient world was a tapestry of invisible connections, where an event in the Near East could send a shockwave that would eventually shape a civilization on the other side of the planet. By understanding these ripples, we realize that the diversity of the globe is not a sign of division, but a sign of how far a single family can travel when driven by the necessity of survival. We are all part of the same original earthquake. Whether in the high Andes, the islands of the Pacific, or the heart of Asia, we are the descendants of those who refuse to stay still. As we look at the complete map today, we are finally seeing what the ancients could only sense, that no matter how far the ripples travel, they all began in the same water. Yet as we trace these lineages to the ends of the earth, we are confronted by a staggering paradox. If every nation began within a single household, why has the story of humanity been defined by the blood of brothers? We see the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth establishing kingdoms that would one day turn to destroy one another. To the modern eye, this transition from one family to millennia of warfare feels like a chilling descent into chaos. But when we apply the comparative model of modern social science, we uncover a hidden variable, a biological recognition error embedded in our very nature. This error is rooted in what scientists call Dunbar's number. Our cognitive hardware was never designed to maintain a sense of kinship with millions. Evolutionarily, the human brain is optimized to manage a stable social network of roughly 150 individuals. Beyond this threshold, the biological bond of family begins to dissolve. As the descendants of Noah cross the great geographical divides, the mountains of the north, the deserts of the south, and the valleys of the east, they didn't just lose sight of one another's lands. They lost the capacity to recognize one another as kin. As these communities grew into tribes and then into empires, The source code of their shared origin was overwritten by a new, local protocol, tribalism. To protect their own circle, each group was forced to create exclusive myths. They fashioned new identities, new languages, and new gods to provide internal cohesion. But the cost of this internal unity was the dehumanization of those outside the circle. The brother who migrated over the horizon was no longer a cousin. He became the other, a competitor for water, land, and survival. What we perceive as ancestral hatred is, in truth, a tragic side effect of our evolutionary survival strategy. The very mechanism that allowed a tribe to endure the harsh conditions of the Siberian tundra or the Saharan heat required them to view every outsider as a threat. The identity trap was set. When the Assyrians of Shem's line clashed with the Egyptians of Ham's line, or when the nomadic warriors of Japheth descended upon the Fertile Crescent, they were not fighting with the knowledge of their shared blood. They were victims of a system failure, a failure of recognition caused by the vast distances and biological limits of the ancient world. This realization changes our understanding of the history of conflict. It replaces the chilling nature of war with a profound sense of empathy for the human condition. We are a species that move too fast for our own biological recognition systems to keep up. We conquered the globe, but in the process, we fractured the memory of Kwa Chung Ta. The conflicts of the ancient world were not a rejection of our shared origin. They were the inevitable result of a family that grew too large for its own heart. As we look back at the Table of Nations, we are not just looking at a map of where we went. We are looking at a record of the moment we began to forget who we were to one another. The tragedy of history is not that we are different, but that we lost the Jiao Thuk to see the brother behind the enemy's shield. As we look at the complete atlas of humanity, we must realize that the fragmentation of our species was never a failure of unity. It was a masterpiece of preservation. History is not a series of accidents, but a deliberate process of partitioning the source code of life to ensure it would never be lost in a single catastrophe. By spreading into the unknown, we were backing up the human experiment across every conceivable environment. The borders we see today, the languages that divide us, and the nations we call home are merely temporary files in a much larger system. From the epicenter at Ararat, the human operating system was broken into different versions, Japheth, Ham, and Shem, each specifically designed to run on a different part of the Earth's hardware. One mastered the frozen north, another the scorched south, and another the vital crossroads of civilization. We became different because we had to survive differently. This understanding of our origins is not meant to inspire a return to the past or a redrawing of ancient borders. Instead, it offers a new protocol for the future. We are not separate entities fighting for dominance. We are different versions of the same original software trying to find the bridge to reconnect. Understanding where we began allows us to see through the temporary masks of geography and biology. The Table of Nations is more than a genealogy. It is a reminder that while time and distance have created an illusion of division, the underlying protocol remains identical. It is an invitation to recognize that despite the thousands of years of silence and the miles of separation, we are all running on the same ancient, resilient code. The map is finally complete, and the connection is waiting to be restored.